It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality.
On this Martin Luther King Day, the Reverend Jesse Jackson invited me to join him this morning in Chicago for the annual Push for Excellence Dr. King breakfast. But since I had to be here in our New York headquarters for our Inauguration Day coverage, I couldn't join Reverend Jackson, who honored me with an award today at the breakfast for the work that I do with the Kind Fund, a partnership I created with MSNBC and UNICEF to deliver desks to schools in Malawi and provide scholarships for girls to attend high school in Malawi. The Kind Fund does have a personal linkage to Martin Luther King through a dear friend of mine who was a dear friend of Dr. King. It was Dr. King's friend, NBA legend Bill Russell, who inspired the work I do in Africa that so many of you have generously supported through your contributions. I got to call Bill Russell a friend and accompanied him to the White House when President Obama gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, thanks entirely to my long friendship with his daughter, Karen Russell, who Bill Russell always introduced as my daughter, the Harvard Law School graduate. Bill wasn't saying that to boast the way some parents might. He said it to honor the road the Russell family traveled to Harvard Law School, beginning with Bill Russell's grandfather, who was not allowed to spend one day of his life in school because there was no school for black children then in Monroe, Louisiana. And Bill's father, who only made it to 6th grade, but watched his son Bill graduate from college and become an NBA champion. And so when Bill Russell told you that his daughter graduated from Harvard Law School, he always had his grandfather and father in mind. When I began doing my program here at MSNBC 14 years ago, it was Karen Russell who delivered the Russell family message to me. She asked, "What are you going to do with the show?" And I started talking about the guests I hoped to get on the show, like Reverend Jackson. And she stopped me and she said she wasn't asking about a TV show. She explained that her father always asked newly arrived NBA stars, "What are you going to do with it?" Meaning, what are you going to do with all the attention you can now command? What are you going to do with it? What Bill Russell did with it was march with his friend, Martin Luther King Jr., and so much more for the rest of his long life. I understood exactly what Karen Russell was asking me, but I didn't have an answer, and I didn't look for an answer. But an answer came to me. A few weeks later, another dear friend, Meg Campbell, a school teacher in Boston, told me about her recent trip to Malawi, where she visited her niece, a doctor who was working in Malawi. As an educator, Meg visited as many schools in Malawi as she could. She asked teachers what they needed, and they all said the same thing, and it was just one word: desks. And when I heard that, I surprised myself a bit by immediately saying, well, we should be able to get them desks. By we, I meant me. And to this day, I don't know what I would have said if Karen Russell hadn't opened my mind and my heart a bit with the Bill Russell question. What are you going to do with it? And the next day, I started planning my first trip to Malawi, and I found my answer to the Bill Russell question. What are you going to do with it? January 20th, Martin Luther King Day, is the day every year when we should ask ourselves our version of what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with whatever ability we have to honor Dr. King's memory and his example? At the breakfast in Chicago this morning, 8-year-old Bradley Holt recited presidential candidate Jesse Jackson's speech to the Democratic Convention of 1988.
Tonight, we pause and give praise and honor to God for being good enough to allow us to be at this place at this time.
We are the ones who are now at this place at this time in American history. And what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would ask you tonight is, what are you going to do about it?